Hello, everyone. My name is Julie. I want to welcome you all to our program, Jewish Culture in Times of Crisis. It is the third of 4 events in celebration of Blavatnik Archive's 20th anniversary since our founding. Across the 4 events, we highlight the power of popular and personal artifacts to preserve and illuminate the past. I'm here to welcome our esteemed speakers, welcome you, the audience, and thank you for coming. For the third time, just a few words about turning 20, but different words than the first 2 times. Well, sort of. In the first program's opening remarks, I focused on the core team: Aaron Kreisworth, Natalia Smatrova, Olga Greco, Brandon Schechter, and Rainas, irreplaceable people. Our village, Marty Kreisworth, Kenny Kreisworth, the remote workers who work with us, our Access family, and the growing network of scholars and specialists. In the second program's opening remarks, I focused on our collections, their growth, as well as their connections to us. Today I'll say a few words about our projects, because while we built the Archive's foundation of holdings and infrastructure, it's often the projects and programs that we produce together with the experts that transform that infrastructure into meaningful content and make accessible discoveries and perspectives. One follows the other. Obviously, without the people, the stuff, and the scholarships, projects can't be produced. I want to emphasize that whether I talk about the people, the collections, or our projects, Len Blavatnik, Alex Blavatnik, and the Blavatnik Family Foundation have made everything we do possible. With their support and with the unique environment they established that encourages responsible exploration and which values innovation. Very conveniently, this stage, there's no stage, but I just mean, the speakers and us here, demonstrates so well how people, stuff, and scholarship come together at the Blavatnik Archive. Focusing on public audience, Aaron has led the way in developing engaging and visually rich digital stories on our website. Professor Amber Nickell, who's here with us, PhD dissertation included some of the sources from the Blavatnik Archive, has published a deep dive digital story on our website that delves into anti-Semitic tropes and postcards that combines digital humanities and visual literacy to deconstruct symbols and connections crammed into one small, wildly popular space, a postcard. She has also worked with her digital humanities classroom to map more than 600 letters that one couple wrote each other during the war, tackling both technical aspects of the project while highlighting the very human themes and emotions that her students identified in the letters. Professor Elissa Bemporad, together with Professor Shternshis, here with us, have worked with us for years. And in fact, co-organized a 2-day conference we produced on Jewish soldiers in the Red Army, a subject that is so very central to our collections. Furthermore, Professor Shternshis hosted our exhibit on the same subject at the University of Toronto, when we produced traveling exhibits that were displayed in multiple campuses in North America. As we brought the exhibits to universities, so many students approached us to share how much they learned and that the exhibit touched their own personal heritage. Dr. Schedrin began working with our collections years ago, first focusing on the Moscow State Yiddish Theater, acronym GASET in Russian, as he's the preeminent scholar and the theater star and one of the most important Soviet Jewish culture figures, Solomon Mikhoels. Our work together has produced discoveries and acquisitions of several relevant collections, fascinating digital stories, an exhibit at the Center for Jewish History on the Soviet Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, exhibits on GASET history in a theater program, and presentations of the archive's holdings in his classroom. We're very, very grateful. I'd like to end with how fitting it is that Professor David Fishman will chair the program, as I clearly remember sitting in his office, obviously, of course, together with Aaron, shortly after we had the audacity to found the archive, and talked about our far-fetched ideas of making unique collections about Jewish life widely accessible. Thank you, Professor Fishman, for your open mind, for your open heart, and for joining us today. Of course, on a more formal note, author of many, many books, winner of book prizes, and professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary. In my conclusion, I am thrilled and grateful to be able to gather together with all of you this evening in this wonderful and special building to hear the talks by our esteemed presenters about Jewish culture in times of crisis. Thank you, Professor Fishman. If you could take over.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. You're in for a special treat. Before I introduce the panel, I just want to congratulate Julie and the team on your 20th anniversary. And what you have done is really extraordinary and really far beyond anything I imagined you would be able to have accomplished 20 years ago when we met, to create an archive of this caliber, of this quality, from scratch, basically. And everybody will get a taste, at least, of what is the treasures that Julie and her team have accumulated through the 4 talks we're going to hear tonight, and through the images we'll get to see. So I'm going to introduce our 4 speakers. Each will speak for 15 minutes, liberally defined. At the end, if there are questions, we'd be happy to entertain some time for questions and discussion. So here I'm introducing everybody in the order that they will present. Amber N. Nickell is an assistant professor of history and internationalization coordinator for the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Fort Hays State University. She specializes in modern Central and Eastern European history, the Holocaust, genocide studies, migration, and has extensive academic publications, including forthcoming books and articles on Holocaust memory, ethnic Germans and Jews in Eastern Europe, and Soviet history. In addition to her research, she's been actively involved in public history initiatives, digital humanities projects, and international collaboration. And her talk will be The Protocols at War, Weaponized Myths of Global Jewish Conspiracy Before, During, and After the Great War of 1914-1939. The Great War, 1914 to 1939, I'll repeat that. Elissa Bemporad is professor of history in the Unger Chair in East European Jewish History and the Holocaust at Queens College and the CUNY Graduate Center. She's a 2-time winner of the National Jewish Book Award. Bemporad is the author of 3 monographs, including Legacy of Blood, Jews, Pogroms, and Ritual Murder in the Lands of the Soviets, and most recently, Revolution, Civil War, and New Ways of Life, which is volume 1 of the Comprehensive History of Soviet Jewry. She's also the editor of several volumes, including most recently, The Destruction of Dubova, Chronicle of a Dead City. And her talk is Yiddish Culture Under Stalinism. Third, Anya Shternshis is the J. Richard and Dorothy Schiff Chair in Jewish Studies and the director of the Anne Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto. She is the author of the critically acclaimed monograph, Soviet and Kosher, Jewish Popular Culture in the Soviet Union, 1923 to 1939. And When Sonia Met Boris, The Oral History of Jewish Life under Stalin. She co-authored, also in the Comprehensive History of Soviet Jewry, the volume on War, Conquest, and Catastrophe, 1939 to 1945. She is one of the authors, together with Oleg Budnitsky, who is here with us today, David Engel, and Gennady Estrach. Besides her academic work, Anya, together with the artist Psoy Korolenko, created and directed Yiddish Glory, the Grammy-nominated project, an initiative that brought back forgotten Yiddish music written during the Holocaust in the Soviet Union. Her talk is Revenge, Devastation, and Anger, Experiences of Soviet Jewish Ghetto Survivors in the Red Army. And last but not least, Vassili Schedrin is an archivist, librarian, research coordinator of the Norton and Nancy Dodge collection of nonconformist art from the USSR at the Zimmerli Art Museum at Rutgers University. Vassili is adjunct assistant professor of Jewish history in the Department of History at Queen's University in Canada. He's the author of Jewish Souls, Bureaucratic Minds, Jewish Bureaucracy and Policymaking in Late Imperial Russia. And his current project is a biography of the Soviet Yiddish theater actor and director Solomon Mikhoels. And Vassili's talk is Lots of Hugs and Kisses, Your Daddy. Was Solomon Mikhoels a family man? On a personal note, before we begin, let me just say that, well, I'm allowed to have a kind of like a parental nachas or joy. Two of the speakers were once my students. Well, three, I guess you could say. So, you know, they'll be great, and I take all the credit.
So before I get started, I just want to thank everyone for putting this together and for coming today. I'm really excited to talk today about some of the anti-Semitic imagery in postcards, which is generally not something folks are excited to talk about, but I do think it's important to talk about nonetheless. And I know that in this room, it might seem awkward to explain anti-Semitism to you, but I do think it's worth explaining it just in case. So anti-Semitism is a liquid ideology. It's a protean shapeshifter which can flow into any vessel. It does not belong to either side of the political spectrum. It flows freely to where it is needed. It never has to make sense. It never has to be rational, and one does not have to believe all of it to buy into some of it. It's also a sticky substance that is nearly impossible to remove from a container. It bonds to the vessel itself. Even if one accepts only a small part of the idea, they are often stuck with it all. Anti-Semitism brings elements of cognitive dissonance to one another, bonding disparate members of a particular group, a national body, for example, together. This is how Jews can, in the minds of some, simultaneously be greedy Western capitalists and Bolsheviks, intensely clever, so much so that they plot global conspiracy, but dumb and bumbling, profoundly religious, yet also occult. The contradictions really do abound. This fluid ideology flows more freely in times of crisis. The period before, during, and after World War I was a moment of great turmoil in Central and Eastern Europe. Empires shattered at the edges, and the residual shards, now nations, sometimes offered safety for Jews. But more often than not, especially as the interwar period wore on, they became weapons. Borders moved rapidly, intra and intergroup conflict proliferated, and early 20th century Europe served as a laboratory for the political ideas of the 19th century at the same time. Classical liberalism, socialism, nationalism. Like all Europeans, Jews participated in some of these experiments, at least the ones that were available to them. Anti-Semitism, however, was a liquid swirling in every single beaker in this laboratory. Anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic ideas were hardly new to the 20th century. A keen researcher can trace them as far back as Judaism itself. However, the 20th century changed anti-Semitism as it morphed into a liquid specially equipped to fit Europe's mutable social, ideological, and geopolitical containers. One of the key turning points was the 1903 publication of the fictitious document, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, in the Russian Empire. The document claimed to be a secret plan orchestrated by Jews to take over the world. It indicated that they would seize control of the media, global commerce, religion, and governments. It brought together some of the prevailing, prior somewhat disparate, anti-Semitic myths of the late 19th and early 20th century. Among them, the Judeo-capitalist, Judeo-communist, and Judeo-Messianic myths. The document was a fake, drawn up by anti-Semitic thinkers in the Russian imperial borderlands. As many know, sometimes things don't have to be real, though, to spark a response. This bona fide fake news served as a catalyst, sometimes validation for those who perceived it as useful in their daily lives and political agendas. The protocols spread westward from the Russian Empire during and after World War I, as White Army soldiers and national émigrés fled the Bolshevik onslaught. They carried the protocols with them, in their minds and their pockets. And the nation states that welcomed them almost universally welcomed these ideas as well, which dovetailed with pre-existing forms of anti-Semitism at home. Among the most well-known of these carriers is Alfred Rosenberg, a Baltic German who rose through the ranks of the Nazi Party and was one of the chief architects of the Nazis' racialized anti-Semitism. Rosenberg and others' very real encounters with Bolshevism, exposure to the protocols, and rising nationalism would amalgamate into the deadliest form of anti-Semitism to date, one dominated by the Judeo-Bolshevik, Judeo-capitalist, and Judeo-Messianic myths. Now, none of these ideas actually work together naturally. They require quite a bit of cognitive dissonance on behalf of the consumer. After all, how are Jews both capitalist and communist at the same time? Global conspiracy, as contrived in the protocols, provided an adhesive that bonded these contradictory ideas together in the minds of readers and viewers by depicting the goal, world domination, instead of laying bare the ideologies. In doing this, the ideologies became secondary, and in this fictitious worldview, the Jew neither cared about Bolshevism nor capitalism, only control. And the ideologies became tools to an end. Images of Jewish global conspiracies, while not new in 1903, really proliferated in the wake of the publication of the protocols. The Blavatnik archive has several pieces of historical anti-Semitic ephemera, including a very sizable postcard collection. And most of these are imagery, though some have text as well. Yet nearly all of them represent the banality of this 20th century anti-Semitism, which is often linked to the protocols. Banal hatred is most certainly some of the most dangerous, as it does not belong to the radical fringe, but rather the everyday and the every person. Hate is perpetrated in imagery and prose, in the boring pieces of mundane paper, that is, in this day and age, bytes now, that pass through hands and now today across screens, sometimes with very little serious thought. Think, for example, of currency, the things that just kind of pass through your hands. Postcards were like this. Coveted tidbits of everyday life at their peak pass through many hands and with them minds from sender to receiver, often shared, collected, sometimes displayed widely. They became permanent parts of the ephemeral landscape that everyone was forced to consume, including Jews. There is a reason why marketing firms stand by consistent and repetitive branding and messaging. One does not have to consume advertisements to do so intentionally. Despite intent, the more times a person encounters, the more they see, the more they hear, the more it sticks to their psyche. In the first decades of the 20th century, anti-Semitism had a brand, catchy slogans, a color scheme, and consistent messaging. And Europeans, whether they wanted to or not, knew this brand and they became branded by it. These seemingly banal postcards worked in tandem with other forms of messaging to construct one of the most potent, sticky, and contradictory mythologies of hate that persisted throughout the 20th century and continues to echo in the contemporary world. Today, because we are limited on time, I want to introduce you to some of these postcards in the collection and talk about some of these themes and messaging that arise throughout them. And I do encourage you to look at these on your own, to visit the Blavatnik's website and engage these on your own, since we won't have so much time here today. So one of the larger myths, and one I'm sure you've encountered in your life, is the Judeo-capitalist myth. And this is linked to some of the oldest and most prolific anti-Jewish tropes, including those of the Jewish usurer, the merchant peddler, and also Judas's 30 pieces. Yes, some Jews lent money. Yes, some were wealthy merchants and peddlers. I have very little to say about the 30 pieces. However, most Jews throughout history were none of these things, and several other groups were involved in the same professions. Nonetheless, it proliferates, right? It becomes a tool. But the Judeo-capitalist myth is fundamentally different from these tropes in that it implies also global Jewish conspiracy, and that Jews are controlling all aspects of capitalist mechanisms for their own profit. Take, for example, the postcard on the left. It depicts Jews as well-to-do peddlers and bankers piling up gold. And the accompanying text reads, "Across on the world, the one who owns the purse and the other owns the money." There goes beyond saying, right, all Jews are bankers and peddlers, is what it's trying to say. And it implies that they are trying to control commerce at both ends. The postcard to the right is an advertisement, ironically, for a Judenfrei, or Jew-free hotel, and it shows a Jew sitting atop a massive gold brick crushing 3 men, respectively holding a hammer, a sickle, and a pamphlet. The implications: there is a Jewish conspiracy in which they will use their wealth to control the workers, the farmers, and the thinkers. Every man is crushed under its weight. Here are 2 other examples, which I cannot go into too much details on, but images like these served a purpose. They intended to spark a response from the toiling masses and farming poor. All of a sudden, it was no longer the wealthy elite, phantoms of feudalistic Europe, or the new bourgeoisie exploiting the workers and farmers. It was the Jews. The other myth that is quite common in these is something called the Judeo-Bolshevik myth. And this is on the opposite side of the spectrum to the Judeo-capitalist myth. In this myth, Jews are working together to spread communism throughout the globe as a route to seizing global power. They are often depicted as responsible for all the violence wrought by Bolshevism, and key Jews who took part in the Bolshevik movement are often used as stand-ins for Jews writ large. The most commonly used Jew in this case is Leon Trotsky, or Lev Trotsky, and I would love to discuss Trotsky today, but we don't have a lot of time for this. What is key to understand is that he did not represent all Jews, and at no point in Soviet history did Jews have an absolute majority in any political power. It's important to note in most of these postcards, there's usually an egregious use of the color red, but for some reason, the 3 I picked today are black and white. And this is part of that branding that I talked about earlier, using the color red. So for example, in the center, we see a postcard titled Lev Trotsky's Coat of Arms, and the image features 2 Jews with overly exaggerated Jewish characteristics. Between them lies a Star of David with Talmud written in it. The number 3 appears inside. Perhaps this is a hearkening to the significance of the number in Jewish writings, the bringing together of the contradictory values into an harmony, with the 3rd being the connecting or the mediating factor. If this is the case, the claim is clear. Judaism is the thing that makes these contradictory ideas work together. And this would also imply that the artists knew the messaging was irrational, and they actually used Jewish thought to try to render it thinkable by the user. The Soviet hammer and sickle appear atop, almost as if a crown, the thing driving it all, and they hold a prayer shawl outward, contorting their bodies into the shape of a bird, as their hands reach down like claws, grasping garlic and fish. This is likely intended to mimic other anti-Semitic imagery, which depicts Jews as vultures, taking from those around them. Their socks are mended. They're poor. Now, is it the poor, smelly, fish and garlic smelling, backwards religious Jew who is swooping down on society, or is it the capitalist? Which one is the threat? And the answer is both. They become a cacophony of myths in the minds of those who consume them. These totally contradictory myths come together in the same postcards, and there are two examples here. I'm actually going to talk about the one to the left. So in this one, this is a Serbian postcard that depicts a crazed-eyed Jew who is clearly quite religious and quite poor. Note the beard, cap, and teeth. And the beard morphs into a four-headed snake, 3 with red symbols atop them. And those symbols, you can't see them very well, I'm guessing, but one is a money symbol, one is a Soviet star, and the other one is a Mason's symbol. And in case you didn't catch it in the imagery, it says his weapons are democracy, masonry, communism, and capitalism. All of these ideas come together in the same thing. One only needs to believe one to believe it all. These containers later became a way to allow for the spread of what many of us call eliminationist anti-Semitism. One of the key steps in any genocide is dehumanization, which is beginning to depict, perceive, and/or treat all members of a group as non-human. Artists actually use the myth of global conspiracy to dehumanize Jews, often illustrating them as undesirable animals or pests associated with threatening or dangerous traits. For example, poison, deception, or disease. The goal of this is to get viewers to start considering that their neighbors might be so undesirable that they needed to be removed, or, at worst, exterminated. And this needed to be done to protect the national body. One of the most common animals used in this way is a snake or a dragon. And the snake is generally understood as so dangerous due to its potential poison, but also as deceptive and sly due to the biblical implications of a serpent. In this way, the snake and the poison, both proverbial and actual, that they hold, represents a fundamental threat to humanity. And the serpent, the thing that orchestrated the downfall of all humankind, must be slayed. In this case, a dragon must be slayed. So the postcard on the right features a dragon with 9 Jewish heads, each with a different label. These include money extortion, world domination, Jewish press, the plague of cinema, Jewish socialism, free thought, masonry, alcohol sales, and landlord usury. Sorry, that was a mouthful. So you can see here they're bringing all of these myths together in the same place. It's being used as a container or a tool to dehumanize Jews, and it's essentially getting the viewer to want to do one thing: slay the dragon. Another common animal that is used is a vulture. And as I already alluded to, this imagery is intended to imply that they are kind of feeding on society. It's an animal that's known for feeding on carrion, and generally, the sight of a vulture is never a good sign, as it indicates that death is surely nearby. The correlation implies that Jews, both figuratively and literally, feed on death, and these are 2 examples of this. The right is a postcard titled From Vulture to Miter, and it taps into increased discussion surrounding Darwinism and social evolution at the turn of the century. And the image implies that Jews evolved directly from vultures. One only needs to look closely to see that the scavenger is still always there. In a darker example to the left, a vulture with a characteristically Jewish head, topped with the Star of David, hovers over a pile of corpses with the blood of the dead dripping from its beak. The caption reads, "Above the communist paradise." This image taps into historic, also false, claims that Jews feasted on human blood near and around Passover or Pesach, and this is known as the blood libel. In doing this, they essentially blamed Jews for all the atrocities of communism, indicating once again that they were something that needed to be eradicated. The most common animal that is used is a spider, or in some instances, an octopus. These creatures with 8 legs are usually shown as reaching their tentacles into every aspect of society, immediately dovetailing with global conspiracy. And in the most extreme form of some of these, they even call for, or at least partially call for, complete extermination. So in the case of the card on the right, this is created by a group called A Russia for Russians. And the text that accompanies it indicates that, quote, "The filthy bastards sense trouble and are scurrying because they will still soon be building houses for the devil in hell." The illustrator frames Jews in this case as a global invasion that has to be eradicated. These are the ideas that fueled the exterminationist rhetoric of the Nazis and their collaborators. They were centuries in the making. The first half of the 20th century and its proliferation of crises radically accelerated these ideas. And if we are genuinely ever to ensure that never again happens, we must realize that intervention must occur when we first see images like this and hear words like this that completely vilify and dehumanize entire communities. It begins decades, sometimes centuries, before active murder begins, and that is when we must intervene. But to intervene, we must first understand the dog whistles and how they work, how they impact our minds. Only by learning that how we are made to hate can we begin unlearning how to hate. We must find and call out the contradictions and lies of the past to confront their apparitions in our contemporary world. I am proud to be doing a little bit of this work in rural Kansas and working with the Blavatnik to do this work here today. And I hope that many of you do this in this room and beyond. And if you're curious about a closer reading, shameless plug, this is the piece that I did with the Blavatnik.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I am truly honored to be here today to celebrate the Blavatnik archive collections, and thank you so much to Julie and to the team for having made these collections available to all of us. I mean, for someone studying now Russian, Eastern European, Jewish history and culture, these are really essential collections. So to celebrate this 20th birthday, which is only the 20th, which this means that you have many, many years, right? Bis 120, right, till 120. I will be focusing on Yiddish culture and the political use of Yiddish in the Soviet interwar period and trace some of the key moments in its history under Stalinism. I will do so by using Blavatnik's unique collections, mostly the propaganda posters, but not only. And my goal is really to give you an overview of the state's attempt to forge a new Soviet Jewish man and woman, to fashion trustworthy Soviet citizens by spreading Marxist ideology in Yiddish, and creating a new Soviet Yiddish culture, proletarian in content and national in form, in Stalin's words. So to begin, let us remember that until the revolution, the Bolsheviks had paid little attention to the question of popular education and culture, and to the fact that before World War I, the Russian Empire constituted the country with the lowest adult literacy rate in Europe. But in the wake of the establishment of the Soviet Union, overcoming cultural backwardness became a priority for the new socialist society. The first step in this change of focus was to control the production and circulation of culture and use it as a weapon of class struggle to spread socialism. To do so among the Jewish communities of the European regions of the new empire, the state chose Yiddish, the language spoken by the large majority of the Jews in the region, and began to fund an impressive number of new publications and institutions. And here you see this poster that is promoting subscription campaigns to Yiddish publications from the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Of course, the state's choice to support Yiddish and not Hebrew, the clerical language of religious Jews, or Russian, the language of the Russian bourgeoisie, or the Russian Jewish bourgeoisie, stemmed from two reasons. One, pragmatic. The only way to successfully Sovietize Jews was to employ the language known by the Jewish masses, their mother tongue. Insisting on Russification would have hampered the state's effort to spread communism. The second reason was a matter of principle, namely, like all other nationalities which had experienced violent Russification pressures from the Tsar state, in the Soviet Union, Jews too had the right to use their own national language. Here, I'm showing you another one of these posters from the Kulturliga, which was founded originally in Kiev in 1918 to promote and develop contemporary secular Yiddish culture, but it was taken over, of course. It was Sovietized in the late 1920s, and here you have, they're advertising this new Yiddish writers library, and it says Yiddish reader, subscribe to the Yiddish writer. So, as you can see from these posters, the most obvious change in Jewish cultural production from the pre-revolutionary period to the Soviet period, besides, of course, the language, pertains to geography. The centers of Jewish cultural production before the revolution were, as most of you know, St. Petersburg, Odessa, or even Vilna and Warsaw, which were after the 1917 parts of other countries. These propaganda posters capture the realignment of Jewish cultural geographies. I showed you earlier the other two posters that have Kyiv and Kharkiv, which had offered meager contributions to Jewish cultural life before the revolution, but after the revolution, they grow rapidly into key centers of Soviet Jewish culture production and education, attracting writers, publishers, and so on. The changing geography of Jewish culture production is captured primarily by Moscow, the most Russian city, and the new Soviet capital, a city that did not really have a legacy in terms of Jewish culture production. And of course, it becomes for the first time, a center of Yiddish intellectuals and cultural activists, and a major center of Soviet Jewish culture social activity. And here you see, again, this is to promote the subscription campaign of the Yiddish equivalent of the Russian Pravda, Der Emes, which was published from 1918 till 1938. As these posters clearly tell us, the three that I just showed you, the Yiddish press and Yiddish publications in general struggled with circulation. Otherwise, why are they, subscribe, subscribe, subscribe? It means that there's a problem. There was an endemic problem with the tension between supply and demand, a problem that was not peculiar to Yiddish, but plagued also other Soviet national minorities in their languages in the 20s and 30s. State printing houses dealt with unreliable distribution networks, inefficient postal system. It all sounds familiar, right? But Yiddish also faced the prestige and competition from Russian language newspapers and books. In 1928, the total circulation of the three main Yiddish dailies published in Moscow, Kharkiv, and Minsk reached only 32,000 altogether. This number was extremely low compared to a potential readership in the hundreds of thousands. At the heart of Stalin's policy of Koreanizatsiya, of nativization, a policy designed to create national elites who would work with the system in fostering national languages and teach communism to the masses, were the schools and the pedagogical institutions. Yiddish language kindergartens, primary and secondary schools, institutions of higher learning were established across the European regions of the Soviet Union, in larger cities as well as in smaller settlements. In Ukraine alone, for example, by 1927, at the height of the nativization project, 502 Yiddish primary schools existed for the approximately 80,000 Jewish students in the territory of the Republic. The popularity of Soviet Yiddish schools hinged on several factors, but overall, even in those areas where Yiddish enjoyed more support because of economic, political, or demographic reasons, the success of the Yiddish educational project was at most moderate. So Yiddish could, as I said, never truly compete with Russian, which remained the all-Soviet language of power, politics, upward mobility, nor could it effectively contend with the languages of the various Soviet republics spoken by the bulk of the residents. For these reasons, many parents, regardless of their political and religious views, encouraged their children to attend a Russian or Ukrainian language school instead of a Yiddish one. And here we have Moisei Dorman, who grew up in Holovanivsk, and whose both parents were teachers in a Yiddish school, but they enrolled him in a Ukrainian language school. As he says here, my parents worked at a Yiddish school, but for some reason, which I can guess, they sent us to a Ukrainian one from which I graduated in 1941. Despite the fluctuation in popularity and the lack of prestige, Soviet Yiddish schools did foster a sense of Jewish ethnic distinctiveness among the younger generation. This represented the unintended consequence of the Soviet nationality policy. Here you can read Polina Chij, what she tells us from the Shtetl and the Homil region. Despite the ongoing attack on Judaism and the absence of Jewish subjects, including Jewish history, Yiddish schools sustained Jewish ethnic identity. The interactions between Jewish students and teachers that Laser Selector captures here quite powerfully, and the ensuing friendship networks that emerged promoted a sense of ethnic distinctiveness within the Jewish space of the school. And this is, again, Selector from Romny in the Poltava region. In addition to the social component, some works of Yiddish literature that students read in class also promoted a positive sense of Jewishness. For instance, students read the classic works of Mendele Mocher Sforim or Sholem Aleichem, who conveyed a sense of ethnic belonging. And in this respect, a key component of the Soviet Yiddish project was the creation of national cultural heroes, who were usually writers whose work did not clash with the socialist worldview. Here again, Mendele, I'm showing you, again, this is from the collection. The work of these writers was celebrated through art, music, issued by the state press, read in the classroom, or declaimed in the local theater. In the case of the Jewish nationality, the classical authors of Yiddish literature lent themselves particularly well to play the role of new Soviet Jewish heroes. Again, in the case of Mendele here, 1936, the evening of 1936, it celebrated his 100th anniversary with literary celebrities who spoke at the event, including Babel, Pfeffer, Markish, Mikhoels, and so on. And of course, you know, in terms of the construction of these Jewish national heroes, there were several schools that were renamed Mendele, streets that were renamed after the Yiddish writer, and of course the museum, the first Soviet Jewish museum in the Soviet Union in Odessa was named after Mendele. And of course, Sholem Aleichem becomes, in a way, a Jewish cultural hero. And here you have the biography written by David Bergelson that was published on the occasion of Sholem Aleichem's 80th birthday. To refashion Jews into trustworthy and modern citizens, Yiddish was also used as the language of the anti-religious campaigns against Judaism. This poster, which is fascinating, is part of the sanitary education campaign promoted by the state, setting new rules for health and hygiene. The 10 rules of cleanliness allude to the 10 commandments. And here it's very interesting. Gay mikveh, and you see the Jewish woman. So you should not use the mikveh, which is, traditionally the space of ritual purity, but under the Soviets it becomes the space that spreads diseases, and you should use the public bath, which, by the way, in the late 1920s becomes a symbol of modern hygiene in Soviet cities. And on the bottom right, you also have this attack on the use of Negelwasser, the water, to cleanse the hands of spiritual impurities that may have attached themselves during sleep, in preparation for the morning prayer. Just along the lines of anti-religious, the way in which Yiddish is used for anti-religious propaganda. Here you see the sea of pigs, the consumption of pork, of course, forbidden in Judaism, and it is used as part of propaganda to, for the development of the Soviet meat industry in 1930. And here also you have a rabbi who, you have other religious leaders, but the rabbi seems really to be at war. He is holding the Torah scrolls rolled onto 2 cannons, rallying in front of a gigantic industrial plant. So he's the conservative force opposing Stalin's great term, right? The economic policies to modernize the country through collectivization of agriculture and rapid industrialization. Of course, Yiddish was also used to promote the normalization of Jewish economic life and employment patterns through productivization, in particular through the establishment of hundreds of agricultural colonies for the Jewish population. In an unparalleled development in Jewish economic life in modern times, the campaign to resettle Jews on land eventually attracted 10% of the overall Jewish population living within Soviet borders. This is a certificate from Kharkiv by Ozet, or Komzet in Russian, and Gezerd or Komerd, which was in Yiddish, which was established in 1925 to support both within the Soviet Union and abroad the plans to resettle Jews on land. And again, also here you see the new modern Jewish woman and Jewish man versus the Jews from the backward Jews from the shtetl. This is from Crimea. At the center, you have the new Soviet Jewish woman here. According to the plan, the Soviet government assigned Jews stretches of land in Crimea, southern Ukraine, parts of Belarus, to work the land at the center of this project. And the JDC, or the Joint Distribution Committee, the American Relief Organization, in agreement with the Soviet Union, would pay the bills of the agrarianization process and purchase modern machinery. In fact, in many of these, not so much this one, but in others, at the center you have the tractor. The symbol of this process, of this new project, is a tractor. Here you have the American Caterpillar tractor with this poster that promotes the security at the workplace, right? Don't stand against the lever, it will hit you. And it shows, you know, that's wrong, this is right. You know, again, other very interesting propaganda posters from tiny farms to mighty collective farms promoting the establishment of Jewish agricultural colonies seemed like the best way to Sovietize and rescue the Jews of the shtetl, an attempt that picked up in tempo, as we see here, with the Red Army soldier and again the tractor at the center. It picked up with the collectivization of the countryside with the introduction of large collective farms, the kolkhozi, in the early 1930s, that would supposedly transform the Soviet Union from an agrarian to an industrial economy. Birobidzhan, the establishment of these Jewish colonies continued in Birobidzhan, which in 1934 was designated as the Jewish Autonomous Region and would remain at the heart of official Soviet Jewish policy throughout the 1930s. You know, there are many reasons why Birobidzhan was a failure, and maybe we can discuss them later with drinks. So, despite the support from the Soviet state, Yiddish had lost substantial ground during the interwar period, like in other countries, by the way. In the 1930s, actually in 1939, the census of 1939, only 39% of Ashkenazi Jews declared Yiddish their mother tongue. And even that number did not necessarily use Yiddish as their primary language of oral or written communication. The fact that in 1938 the state had liquidated the Soviet Yiddish schools, except in the autonomous region of Birobidzhan, made things even more dismal. It is true that Yiddish writers and poets who were not killed during Stalin's political terror of the late 1930s still belonged to the Yiddish language section of the Soviet Writers' Union, and their work was published, often in Russian translation. But their readership in Yiddish was slowly vanishing. The state had not only closed the schools, but had also cut the print runs of Yiddish books and periodicals since the mid-1930s, and the country's leading Yiddish newspaper, the Moscow Emis, was shut down in 1938. The ways in which the hundreds of thousands of Jews in the newly annexed territories of Western Ukraine and Western Belarus, who came under Soviet rule after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Hitler and Stalin of 1939, the ways in which they experienced the political, economic, cultural, and social norms imposed on them by the Soviet state varied. To follow the blueprint from the 1920s and 1930s in order to Sovietize the Yiddish-speaking Jews from the former Polish lands and create loyal Soviet citizens seemed reasonable, seemed like the way to go. Here you see a poster from 1940, two posters actually, but let's focus on this one, 1940, Greetings to the Great Stalin, you know, promoting the popular involvement in the 1940 elections to the organs of the Soviet power in these territories, Western Belarus and Western Ukraine. The Jewish response to Soviet Yiddishization in these territories was complex, ambivalent, and often generationally divided. While Soviet Yiddishization opened doors to education and mobility, it was widely distrusted insofar as it aimed at, for many, at erasing authentic Jewish cultural life. The German invasion in the summer of 1941 cut short what was, in effect, a historical experiment. The Soviets had only about 21 months to restructure Jewish life in the annexed territories. That was barely enough time to establish schools and newspapers in Yiddish, let alone to measure their long-term impact. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Julie, Blavatnik Foundation, for inviting, for organizing. 20th anniversary is almost 20th anniversary of us working together, so I take, it's especially a big honor to be here at this celebration and to see all of you. I'm also more nervous than normal because, even though David Fishman, said that he will take pride in our presentations, he graded my work, I still remember that B-, so I don't know. And speaking of which, Zvi Gittleman is sitting there in the second row. Should I start telling you about his red pen? Anyway, in the good old days. So anyway, I hope my new research will, not require so much red pen, but I'm very excited also to be sharing it with you here, and this opportunity to think about this topic, about what it was like for Jewish survivors of ghettos in Transnistria to serve in the Red Army. This topic, to study this still very much not known topic, became possible when new archives, including materials from the Blavatnik collection, actually came to our attention. So I will share some of the findings with you and ask some questions about this and provide some maybe hypothesis on how we can make sense of those experiences. So I will start with the story of Mark Kleinberg, who was 12 years old when his town where he lived, called Khotin, came under the Soviet rule, and instead of Romania, now became part of Chernovitz region of Ukraine. On July 9th, 1941, German and Romanian troops entered Khotin, and next day they began rounding up Jewish men. This is when his father was killed, on the first day. A month later, he and his mother were deported to Securiane, a labor camp about 88 kilometers east of Khotin. They lived through starvation, cold weather, deprivation, and severe diseases. In 1942, his mother came out to get something to eat and was shot just for fun by a Ukrainian guard of Sohiriane camp. This is the photo of Kleinberg's parents from the Blavatnik archive taken in 1925. Marcus Kleinberg went to an orphanage, and he moved into Dorohoi. Let's see if I have a photo for you. No, I don't. And where he lived in the orphanage funded by the Romanian Jewish community from Bucharest. In March 1944, when the Red Army entered Dorohoi, he went to the Soviet commandant's office and asked if he could volunteer to serve in the Red Army, because he said he wanted to revenge for deaths in his family. We had a large family, he says, and I'm the only one who survived. After 2 months of training, Kleinberg became a radio operator, and on November 13th, 1944, he was dropped as a paratrooper into Hungarian territory. For 4 months, he used a portable radio to transmit information about the movements of military units. He received the Order of Glory of the 3rd class for carrying out a special assignment behind enemy lines. He became a decorated hero of the war. According to Soviet military records, by the 9th of May of 1945, he was awarded 3 high-level medals: Order of Glory, Medal for Liberation of Budapest, and Medal for the victory over Germany in the Second World War II. In his justification for one of these awards, the deputy head of the investigative unit of the Second Ukrainian Front, where Kleinberg served, Lieutenant Colonel Zlachevsky, wrote, "Kleinberg is a brave, decisive, serves as an example for other soldiers in the unit." At that time, by the way, Kleinberg was only 16 years old. That's a photo from the archive. When asked about his experiences during the war itself, Kleinberg emphasized that he always had to keep secrets. mostly because, well, he served as a spy in that unit, but also about what happened to him during the war, before he was drafted. He didn't tell a lot of people, and maybe not even anyone, that he, for example, was in Ghetto before he volunteered to serve in the Red Army. His motivation to fight, to revenge, to seek justice were articulated by him during the interview, but he never suggested in the course of that conversation, in-depth conversation with his interviewer, Leonid Reines, who I think is here, right? That he actually shared the fact that he served, that he was in Ghetto with any of his fellow combatants. What was it like for him to fight the war as a recent survivor who lost his family? Did it feel like justice that he was able to capture a soldier or transmit secret radio messages? Or did it feel like a lack of justice after the war when he suffered a large share of discriminatory practices in his employment and career choices because of what he said, "my last name"? His interview had as many revelations as it did silences. Dressed in a military uniform filled with medals, he projected the persona of a brave person who survived his parents' deaths, orphanage in Ghetto, combat, Soviet doctor's plot, immigration to America, raised two sons, one is oncologist in LA, another one anesthesiologist in Michigan. But he did not talk about his fears, his losses, his despair, and even his anger that remained outside of his story. Kleinberg is one of many unknown number of soldiers, although I'm a little worried saying unknown. Oleg Budnitsky is here, I'm sure he counted, but let's see. Oleg, if you know, tell me. Unknown number of Jewish survivors who served in the Red Army after the liberation. We know very little about that demographic, from which ghettos they came, how many of them were drafted, how many of them volunteered, like Kleinberg, how many were punished for avoiding the draft. There are stories like this too. How many served under new names and identities trying to hide their ghetto past. In many cases, stories of these experiences involved hiding, concealing, and experiencing additional hardships, even after surviving ghettos. For example, another interviewee from the Blavatnik archive collection, Boris Feldman, another survivor of Transnistria, was drafted in the Red Army after the war, said that survivors were often sent to do the same tasks as penal battalions, even often together with penal battalions. I don't know if it's true or not, but that story definitely deserves further investigation. And he says that they, too, somehow, survivors of those ghettos had to pay the price for survival. Penal battalion soldiers had to pay the price for committing crimes, and it was believed that if they are wounded, they kind of pay the price. But survivors, too, were somehow guilty for surviving the war under the occupation. And they were asked to fight with especially difficult tasks. Another survivor, another interviewee, Grigory Simchovich, survivor of Pechora, camp of Vinnytsia region of Ukraine, also Transnistria, insisted that when he served in the army, soon after the liberation, he tried to hide his wartime experiences from his comrades because he would be punished for it. Now, in the climate of such silences, both during the war and during the interviews, it remains unclear how exactly experiences of ghettos, camps impacted perceptions and actions of such soldiers during combat, especially when it comes to their emotions. For example, were they more likely to notice destruction of Jewish communities wherever they went? Were they more likely to initiate amateur revenge? Or were they more likely to keep their heads down compared to those who did not see ghettos firsthand? Sometimes the answers come to us from archives created for different purposes, and that's not my idea, my thought, unfortunately. It's Yosef Haim Yerushalmi, who wrote that the historians should search for answers in archives which were not created for them. So In my case, I'm looking for these answers into the archive of the Vernadsky National Library, created soon after World War II, a little bit during the war itself. And this is the archive created by ethnomusicologist and folklorist Moisei Beregovsky, who looked for survivors and recorded songs that they sang after they were liberated from ghettos in Transnistria. And that project was done between 1944 and 1947. And although the majority of songs that he recorded were from women and children, there was some by men. Some of them were survivors of those ghettos in Transnistria who then served in the army and then came back to sing their songs for Beregovsky. From Bemporad Ghetto, we have songs from Boris Zitzerman, Itzik Semidubovsky, and we know that they served in the army after, not from Beregovsky archive, we know it from Soviet archives that preserved their names and their awards and the places from where they were drafted. You can look all these things up. So one of the examples of such a song and also a person who sang it comes to us from Zhabokhrich, a small town in the Vinnytsia region of Ukraine, also in Transnistria. And thanks to the fact that Beregovsky wrote down every name of every person who sang this song, we can actually trace the story of this specific person and this specific song in a little bit more detail. And what were the songs about? Maybe I'll tell you a little bit about this first. So most of them are talking about destruction of Jewish communities. In fact, they talk so much about destruction of Jewish communities that, before I prepared this talk for this presentation, I didn't even think of those people as maybe veterans of the Red Army. I thought of them as survivors of ghettos who, of course, write songs about those experiences. But once I started researching them and looking them up here in Blavatnik archive, in Shoah Foundation archive, also in Podvig Naroda, digitized military Soviet records, and also Fortunov archive. There's so much of those documents collected, so it became possible to trace those people. Turns out, after they survived ghettos, men, not women, were drafted in the Red Army. Then they came back, and the songs come from that. So suddenly it changed a lot of context of what I was reading. It was not just about documenting their own tragedy, but it also came after the experience of serving. So the songs themselves were elaborate, explicit, full of anger, full of emotions, and there was nothing there about hiding. So I'll show you this one example now. So this comes from a man named Nickell Gershberg, a hairdresser from Zhabokhrich, who survived World War II in Zhabokhrich. In July 1941, 437 Jews were shot in Zhabokhrich within 3 days, both by Romanian soldiers, but also by local residents. And they were shot in 3 cellars, right in Zhabokhrich itself. And Gershberg hid in neighbor's attic from where he saw all the shootings. After the shootings were done, and that was, by the way, the largest massacre, like the targeted massacre of Transnistria during World War II itself. So in 3 days, 437 people were killed. So anyway, after that was done, survivors and also people who ran away from Zhabokhrich were able to come back, and Romanians set up a ghetto for them. That's where Gershberg survived the war, kept working as a hairdresser. And then in March 1944, when Zhabokhrich Ghetto was liberated, he was drafted in the Red Army. He went all the way to Berlin and came back to Zhabokhrich just a few weeks prior to Beregovsky's visit. Beregovsky comes to Zhabokhrich, is looking for people who want to sing songs, and he finds Gershberg. Gershberg was very excited to sing this song for Berezovsky. He called it Massacre. How do we know that he was excited? Because his daughter, Celia Gershberg, was interviewed by the Shoah Foundation. She also lived through Zhabokridge Ghetto, and there are all these photos of her, her father, her mother, and stories of that song, where she says that her father wrote the song after he saw the massacre, and it was very important for him to sing it, and he knew it very well. So this is the note from Berezovsky's archive with that song. You see how the project was not exactly finished because Berezovsky was arrested for his work right after, and in 1940, well, he was arrested in 1950, but the organization where he worked was shut down earlier, so they didn't have time to write the notes. But they did record it with this sound. So I want to show you the translation of this song, and even we will have a chance to hear Nickell Gershberg himself, because when Vernadsky National Library of Ukraine digitized those recordings in 2018, and I think Mila Sholokhova, who was very involved in this project, was just here, they were able to record Gershberg's voice, and I have to tell you, it carried through decades. So maybe I'll play for you a little bit so you don't just take my word for it. I'm playing the end. So you see what I mean? The last verse that you heard is the one that's bolded here, right? And it says loud and clear, tell the world what happened in Zhabokridge. And it has a lot of details about the massacre. It's like a photograph of that massacre, but in the form of a song with rhymed words. So one thing that we don't see in this song is about his wartime experience. How would we know he served in the Red Army? But maybe there is, the song itself is actually impacted by it. Maybe his anger is not just at the destruction of his community, but also at the fact that he is not able to tell people around him in the army itself about what happened to him. Above all, the song is about emotions, despair, the helplessness of onlookers, horror of mothers, and fear. And the last stanza is especially interesting because it calls for people to remember that the peace of the cemetery is deceptive, and it used to be a vibrant city where all residents are now dead. And in order to remember that, he needs to tell the story. So the song calls for the opposite behavior that so many interviews said that they did. The song says one shouldn't hide, one should tell, and one should tell it emotionally, one should tell it with passion, as opposed to just remembering or even like at least saying what happened. And of course, it is a rhetorical call, because Gershberg himself, let me find you a photo of him here in 1987. According to his daughters, both of them actually survived. Celia Goldstein and Maria Grubina, you can listen to those interviews in Shoah Foundation, said that their father never talked about being in Ghetto and never talked about the Red Army either, with the exception of one song. And this song he talked a lot about, so much in fact that when his daughter Celia immigrated to Israel and got involved with this whole kind of veteran community, survivor community and all this, She sang that song at one of the gatherings of those veterans and survivors. Her Yiddish was not quite there. She didn't really speak it. But somebody said to her, what an interesting song. So she wrote the words of that song down and with Russian letters, right? And then she submitted that document to Yad Vashem, as one does, So this is a document from Yad Vashem archive. And if you read Russian and if you know Yiddish, you will see it is very close to the text, to what Gershberg wrote, except she thought that she called the song a prayer. This was her father's prayer. And when she was interviewed by the Shoah Foundation much later, in the middle of a conversation on a completely different topic, she said to the interviewer, "Can I sing you a song?" And this woman was like, "Okay," but didn't ask her anything about it, didn't ask anything after, because she didn't speak Yiddish. But I want to play for you that last stanza again, and you will see, that the work of her father did not, was not in vain.
Nicht nur ein Menschen, nur ein viele ein Stein. Ein stellt euch vor Menschen, was der Städtel Rabokritsch hat übergelebt. Singt die Lied, in Seiten Jeremes begleibt. Geht über der Welt, in dem ganzen jiddischen Eulam. As wenn im Städtel Rabokritsch is geworden a besoilam.
You see, like the words, the tune is very similar. The only change Celia made is this, that her father sang, "Tell the world," every person in the world, and she said the Yiddish and Oilam, right? So she said the Jewish world. I think it's because she's in Israel, and that Jewish world does not want to hear much about her experience, so maybe that, but I have no idea. All I know, I can speculate, whatever, but all I know is that the archival document says the whole world, she says the Jewish world. Other than that, the tune is the same, and the words are very close to original. So to conclude, when we look at Soviet Jewish experiences, I know, in the Red Army during World War II, especially the experiences of Holocaust survivors, we find that every type of source contains its own secrets and silences. Oral histories, for example, don't tell us just facts. They project personas to be remembered. They offer what psychologist Robert Butler called a life review, where contradictions from the past get smoothed over, reconciled, and many uncomfortable details are left out. Archives created by the Soviet authorities, such as documenting those awards that I showed you, are valuable because they give us precise details about where someone served, and they confirm certain pieces of biography. But they definitely don't tell us the story of decision-making, of challenges, of dilemmas. The folklore archive gives us something different, information that isn't filtered through memory or memory loss. Yet, it too is restricted by censorship, by the sensitivities of the time, and of course by the purpose for which it was created. It doesn't preserve stories or histories, only songs and the briefest of context. And still, when we take all these documents together, we can begin to answer some of the most important questions about how survivors served in the Red Army. And the importance of this question is anything but trivial. It's not just about history, it's about tracing personal trajectories. Think of it, after surviving ghettos and camps, these already traumatized individuals went on to live through other ordeals, combat, post-war Soviet discrimination, and often the dislocation and immigration late in life. And yet, they managed to tell their stories. By studying how they made sense of these emotions, we uncover what may be the deepest secret, how to live something resembling a normal life in circumstances where normalcy itself could never be attained. Thank you so much.
I want to start from wishing happy 20th birthday to Blavatnik Archive. And I am very proud and honored to be a part of your work for the past 7 years. And I will start with that, how we started. In 2018, my friend and colleague, historian Jeff Weidlanger, referred me to the Blavatnik archive, who hired me to catalog the Moscow State Yiddish Theater Gazette collection. The material covered the entire story of Gazette, which begins in December 1920, when Alexei Granovsky's Yiddish theatrical studio moved from Petrograd to Moscow, and there became the State Yiddish Theater. The theater quickly rose to prominence and became one of the leading Moscow theaters. In 1929, after a successful European tour, the theater's founder, Granovsky, did not return to the USSR, and Solomon Mikhoels, Gazette major star, assumed the leadership. Gazette continued to develop under Mikhoels, accomplishing many successful productions ranging from Shalom Aleichem Stevia to Shakespeare's Lear. Gazette's story ends in December 1949, almost 2 years after the assassination on Stalin's orders of Solomon Mikhoels. And the theater itself was closed by the authorities for quote-unquote lack of audiences and quote-unquote lack of productivity. In 2020, I was lucky to discover and also privileged to secure donation to Blavatnik archive of another collection related to Gazette and Mikhoels. Formerly, it was a part of a personal archive of Victoria Bishop's, Mikhoels' granddaughter, a daughter of Mikhoels' eldest daughter, Natalia Vovsi Mikhoels, and Soviet composer Mieczyslav Weinberg, who brought the Mikhoels family archive from the USSR to Israel, where her family and she immigrated in the 1970s. Victoria's great care for Mikhoels' archive and his memory and her generosity helped to preserve this unique collection and make it available to scholars and public through the Blavatnik archive. The collection comprises almost 400 items, including over 100 letters, 75 of them written by Mikhoels, 15 postcards, all of them written by Mikhoels, 46 cables, and over 200 photographs. Most of the collection's materials is in Russian, very few in Yiddish and Hebrew. Materials of the Solomon Mikhoels collection complement the Blavatnik Archive's Moscow State Yiddish Theater collection and 3 others, the world's largest archives of Mikhoels and Gazette, 2 in Russia, 1 in Israel. Altogether, these archives comprise a rich resource on Solomon Mikhoels as a virtual symbol of the Soviet Yiddish culture, informal leader of the Soviet Jews, and brightest star and director of the Soviet Yiddish Theater. However, the documents of the Mikhoels collection at Blavatnik Archive open a window on secluded world of his family. Relationships between Mikhoels, his wives, daughters, close and distant relatives, impact of Mikhoels' work and theatrical milieu on his family life, and impact of family issues on his work in theater. Mikhoels' correspondence, especially postcards and cables, document the extent and intensity of his travel, including performance tours, business trips, and vacations. Photographs, many of them previously unknown, provide rare images of Mikhoels' life, from his early years in the 19-teens Riga to celebration of his life and work in 1990s and early 2000s Moscow. It's good to be an orphan, Shalom Aleichem used to say, and we can say that it's good to know that Mikhoels was not an orphan, as his formal portraits suggest, but a family man, as testified by his virtual family album that I created based on the newly available archival materials. So here is the beginning. The Vovsi family house in Daugavpils, Latvia, where Mikhoels was born in 1890 and lived until approximately 1904 when he moved to Riga. Mikhoels' father, merchant of the second guild, Mikhoel Vovsi, immortalized in Solomon's stage name, Mikhoels, son of Mikhoel. Solomon Mikhoels and his brothers, with whom he maintained close connections. His twin brother, Yefim, or Chaim, on the, so this is Chaim, and his older brother, Moisei, also known as Mikhail. Mikhoels' in-laws in Riga In the corner, Judah Lev Kantor, Hebrew poet, Russian Jewish journalist, and government rabbi of Riga, and his family, including 3 children. Sarah over here, and Mikhoels' first wife, Elissa, sister, who lived with Solomon and Sarah in Moscow and described their life in her letters to their younger brother, Mikhail, who moved to Paris. Mikhoels' daughters, Natalia, also known at home Talechka or Talyonak, with her mother, Sarah. Nina, whom Mikhoels called Ninushka, with Mikhoels in the stage costume. And as the newly available correspondence from the Blavatnik archive shows, Mikhoels was closest with Natalia, who adored him, absolutely. Mikhoels' lover, whom she called his second wife, whose name is Evgenia or Zhenya Levitas, and his third wife, Anastasia Pototskaya, professor of biology. Mikhoels also adopted Pototskaya's daughter, Varvara. Mikhoels loved his family and especially his daughters, Natalia and Nina. This is how his letters to them usually opened. Talechka, my sunshine, my happiness, my only happiness and pride. I haven't written all that time, but believe me, my little kitty, that all the time I have endlessly longing for and thinking of you. My darling, my happiness Talechka, little daughter, little sunshine, hooray, soon, soon I will see you. My happiness, my daughter, my darling, my love, golden Talyonak. My golden, dear, beloved daughter Talechka, my little darling. And this is how Mikhoels usually closed his letters. When I see you, I will be the happiest person in the world. I kiss you, my little daughter, my love, my happiness, your daddy. Write to me, every letter of yours is a great joy for me. How I kiss you, it's scary. I embrace you, my happiness and life, your daddy. Write, my happiness, in detail about everything, lots of hugs and kisses, countless, countless times, my joy, your daddy. And finally, and I hug and kiss you, my dear beloved ones, and I hold you, kiss you, so it should be multiplied by 100. See you soon. Once again, I kiss you, my sunshine, my joy, all yours, daddy. What can we find in between these openings and closings? Was Solomon Mikhoels a family man, really? What kind of person was he? How was his family and personality related to his art? Let me tell you a story based on documents and photographs connected, some of them. In 1916, before becoming the greatest star of the Soviet Yiddish theater, and even before becoming an actor, Solomon Mikhoels, then a law student named Shlomo Vovsi, married Sarah Kantor, daughter of Judah Leib Kantor, a Hebrew poet and scholar from Riga. The couple had 2 daughters, born in the 20s, when Gazette, Mikhoels' theater, moved to Moscow, Natalia and Nina. In 1931, Mikhoels fell in love with Evgenia Zhenya Levitas, a Gazette actress who joined the troupe in 1924. Natalia blamed Zhenya for stealing her father's heart and destroying their family. Quote, Mikhoels' subtle and profound personality, his charm and talent attracted to him not only the greatest cultural figures of the time, but also many women desiring to bask in the radiance of his fame. However, only one such woman dared to trespass into the sacred domain of our family, the actress Evgenia Levitas. Papa suffered enormously as his soul was divided and he felt unceasing guilt, but he remained undecided, end quote. Natalia also believed that it was the affair that ultimately caused her mother's death. It was too much for Sarah's weak health. Mikhoels was very concerned. He almost panicked as he kept sending cables home from the theater's 1932 summer tour in Odessa. July 16, Sarachka, I did not get through today. I am going to Odessa. Send me cable immediately to Odessa. Money sent with Zilberblatt. Big kiss to you and the children. Daddy. July 17, I am concerned by your silence. Urgently send me a cable about the condition of Sara Lvovna. I look forward to it. Kisses to you and the children. Mikhoels. July 24, Sarachka, I sent a cable to Ney asking to give you 200 rubles. The troop in Leningrad will also send you money. I am worried about the state of your health. Hugs and kisses, Mikhoels. July 27, didn't get through. I will call tomorrow. What happened? I beg you, tell me. Money sent, Mikhoels. July 30, I left by express train to Moscow. I will come on the 31st. Kisses, Mikhoels. Natalia recalled, quote, on August 4, 1932, Mama died of kidney failure. Papa, who promptly returned home, interrupting his tour, stayed with us. He didn't leave the apartment. He didn't shave. A few months later, on December 29, 1932, a sudden stroke ended the life of Zhenya Levitas. Mikhoels remembered, quote, in 1932, I was overwhelmed by grief. In a short period, I lost those closest and dearest to me. These heavy losses knocked me down, made me unable to cope. I was thinking about leaving the theater, end quote. According to Natalia, Mikhoels was broken, but struggling to regain himself. He spent 3 months from January to March 1933 at Zhenya's apartment in silence, motionless, and immersed in thought. He was even seen jotting something on pieces of paper, which was very unusual for him, as Mikhoels, in his own expression, quote, trusted only the live spoken word, end quote. In the summer of 1933, when he was able to resume his work during the rehearsals of David Bergelson's Midas Adin at Gasset, Mikhoels' mind wandered elsewhere as he hand-wrote repeatedly on the reverse side of the play script, Жена, Женя, жизнь, wife, Zhenya, life. It was perhaps then that he wrote the sad love poem, which opens with the following lines. Once upon a time, the one and only man in the world fell in love with the one and only woman, Eve. Although their love was beautiful, they were compelled to believe that their love was sinful and shameful. And they believed and started to cover their shame with a fig leaf. Perhaps it was then that Mikhoels, an accomplished actor, started seriously thinking about playing Shakespeare King Lear, which for Mikhoels, according to historian Vladislav Ivanov, was not only one of the most challenging theatrical roles for an actor, but was also, quote, existential salvation from the utter chaos tormenting his soul, end quote. Natalia recalled her father's appearance when he left Zhenya's apartment for the first time since her death, suddenly hunched and old, and later she recognized, quote, this same look and Mikhoels' shaky steps in his first appearance on stage as Lear. Lear's death at the end of the play was crucial to Mikhoels' conception of the role. He wrote that, quote, Lear didn't die of exhaustion. He died actively because he would not and could not survive the death of Cordelia. For him, there was no reason to go on living. The mise-en-scène of Lear's death, when he lies down next to Cordelia and dies, was not thought out in advance. I don't think anyone could plan anything like this. I remember the folk saying about the feeling of genuine grief. You could lie down in a coffin and die. This is how the mise-en-scène of Lear's death came about. I didn't plan anything, I simply felt that Lear should die in such a way, that is, in a way that corresponded to my own perception of this tragedy, end quote.
Cordelia! Cordelia! Ha! Ha! Men hat sie aufgehangen. Weinkind. Du wirst zu mir nicht umkehren keinmal. Otto zerspielt. La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. Ot, set, believe, lieben, set.
Thus died Lear and Mikhoels went on living. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank all four of you. This was truly special, and nothing could have shown you how rich and diverse the Blavatnik archive is than these four very, very different talks. We've decided that rather than open it up to public discussion, our speakers are here, we're all here. Please come up and talk with them. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing in this celebration of the Blavatnik archive.